Good morning, Koshin and Chodo. We are so excited to have you on our show today. We love having like-minded guests on the show. And you guys, we really haven't jumped into the topic of what we're going to discuss today. So again, welcome. And before we do dive in, one question that we love to ask all of our guests is, what is your non-negotiable to start every day?
So mine is, before I open my eyes, I always think of 5 things that I'm grateful for in my life. And to me, that's non-negotiable. I exercise every morning, non-negotiable. I sit meditation, zazen every morning. And before I leave the house, I hold Chodo's face and tell him how much I love him. Before I go, non-negotiable.
Oh, that's so sweet.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
How about you, giggle pants?
My non-negotiable is walking into the living room and turning on New York One. It drives me crazy, and I love the weather. I love listening to Anna Bergman. I love the whole thing about New York One. And he says, I got to take my morning to say how I know what's going on in New York City where we live. And it is, so that's one of my non-negotiables. And the non-negotiable is that he does say goodbye to me, and he does let me see that face. And if he forgets, Ramona shout, "Koshin, where are you going?" And he goes, "Oh, sorry, honey." So that's our non-negotiables in the mornings anyway.
So this is for both Koshin and Chodo. Everyone has a story, and we'd love for you guys to share yours in a nutshell. Your personal journey about how you became Zen monks and ultimately founded New York Zen Center for Contemplative Care right in New York City.
So there's the nutshell story is I grew up in a very chaotic and violent home, and really looking for stillness and looking for other models for how to be in life. And so when I was 8 years old, I was laying on a carpet with my grandfather, and we're looking through a National Geographic, and there was at that time there would be lost native tribes very often. And this one time there was a profile of a city called Tokyo, and I was just amazed. I remember turning the page, and I still remember the smell of the magazine. And there was this picture of this man wearing this large bamboo hat, which is called an Arirogasa hat. And you could just see his mouth, and he had a slight smile, and wearing robes. And he was completely in focus, and everyone else in the photo was blurred. And so it was this really poignant moment of recognition, and I was so drawn in. I remember reading the caption, "Zen Buddhist monk in Tokyo," and I remember thinking, I want to be that when I grow up. And because there was this stillness, of course, I understand more now what I was seeing in retrospect, but really seeing that, wow, you could be content and still and part of things, even when everything around you is blurred and not making sense. So I would say that was the main kind of a crystallized moment. Yeah.
Which at a young age, that's so unusual that you don't hear about many kids saying, "I want to be a Zen Buddhist monk when I grow up." That's
And then I did,
And then you did, right? Which is even cooler.
Amazing. How about you?
Well, I also grew up in very chaotic, violent homes. My mother was 17 when she had me, and she never married. She also had 2 other kids, but So we were always on the road, as it were, never really secure in one home. And it was so chaotic. Her men tended to be violent and alcoholics, as she was. And so there was no clear path for me in my life. I grew up, as I said, with a crazy childhood. Then I became an addict and an alcoholic myself. By the time I was 16, I was addicted to amphetamines. And I did a series of geographics. I lived in Israel, I lived in Spain, Amsterdam, Israel. And so it was throughout my life, there was no settled place to be, which is exactly like my childhood. And then I eventually came to New York in 1983. And I got sober. I was sober for 5 years. And I met a woman who actually turned out to be a Buddhist monk, also a Buddhist nun. And she said, we had this conversation. I said, I have no idea.
In a hallway.
And in a hallway, I said, I have no idea who I am. I was a child, I was incested, I was beaten, I became a drunk, yada, 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 all this stuff. And she said, where are you right now? And I said, what do you mean? She said, right now, where are you? I said, well, I'm standing here in front of you. She said, right. You know what you need to do? I said, well, you need to shut up. I said, what? She said, well, you're living out of your stories. And it's not that those stories didn't happen, but right now in this moment, you have an opportunity to let that go. And not so much let it go like it didn't happen, but allow it to find a space in your body or in your psyche that's not constantly erupting. And I said, I don't know how to do that. She said, well, I can show you. I have a Zendo, and why don't you come and sit on the cushion? So I had no idea what she was saying. So I went along and I went to the Zendo, and she put me on the cushion, and she said, okay, sit there. And that was the first time I felt safe and at home. And I just started bawling. And she said, sit there until you stop crying. And so it took me about 3 hours, 4 hours.
Wow.
And then she said, come back tomorrow. And then I came back and I came back and I came back. And that was 20 years ago. No, we've known each other about
30 years ago.
Almost 30 years ago. Yeah. And
Well,
so
I was just going to say, it's so amazing that you just came upon her, and then you took her up on, her suggestion and kept doing it. Like, you could have just been like, oh, that lady's crazy, and walked the other way, and out the door you went, right?
yeah,
Well,
what it was very, at the very moment that I met her, it was very clear to me that my life was about to change.
Mm-hmm.
When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That's
Exactly.
what keeps coming to my head
Yeah.
right now.
Totally.
Absolutely. And she's still my teacher today. She's 94.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I got
Is she
the
in New York?
chills,
I want to come there.
yeah, she's out on Long Island, and she's
Amazing.
She's beginning to behave like a 94-year-old now. But she's fabulous. Yeah.
So as we're just kind of dabbling and talking about this a little bit, can you guys explain to our listeners, what is a Zen monk, first of all? What does that even mean? Because I think there's people that don't know. And then what is a modern day monk? And maybe it's the same. I don't think it is, but.
For me, it means that living your life by a vow of service. And so that I make my decisions for and through the community. So being of service. So really thinking about how I spend time. Because actually that's the deep question we all have to answer is, what are we doing with our time? And because that's really who we are our actions. And so for me, a monk is someone who that is the clear priority. And it's like the center pole of a great tent, where my vow of service and being of use and how I orient what I say, what I do, and is all through the practice and seeing everything as an opportunity to practice.
Oh, yeah. I'm not sure that there's that big a difference between a modern day monk and say a traditional monk in the 12th century Japan, because as Koshin said, it's for me and for Koshin too, it's about being of service in the world, being of service to others and selflessness. And it's not about me. It's about seeing the other as us. When we separate from other folks, they're not me, I'm not them, then we're in trouble. When we're able to see that we're all part of the one, I don't see you as a separate person. I see you as part of the great universe, and we're both playing a part in that. I think one of the main differences is that we live in skyscrapers here in Manhattan, and in Japan they're still living in temples. But
Well, our temple's in a loft.
Our temple's in a loft right now. Yeah. But as I said, at the core of it, there's not much difference. The ethics are the same. The service model is the same. Yeah.
I think you just like really humanize the definition of a monk, because I think sometimes we do just have that vision or, something that we read or something that we saw many years ago, like you said, you have to take a vow of silence and you can't have a partner or whatever it is. I know there's different types of monks, but, it just seems more real. Like you're just like us. You go to Starbucks, like we talked about in the morning, and you get your, triple espresso or whatever it was. I've forgotten already. In the morning. And I know even in the book, Koshin, you talk about like loving Apple products and things like that. So you're, real humans just like us, right? But especially now, and I know we'll dive in and talk about the book a bit, you do kind of discuss like the current state of the world. And just like you said, like seeing others as us. And if we all saw others as us, wow, what a different world we'd be living in right now, right?
Especially in today's world, right? Where
Yes.
everyone's so polarized.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, and Koshin, I just keep thinking about the story you told about the geographic image that you saw as a child, where the monk was like, clear, and there was all this stuff going on in the blur in the background. And that, I'm thinking about the two of you in New York City, and you guys are sitting there and you're very calm, but there's a lot of laughter. And I can just see in your presence, like how relaxed you both are. And you're in one of the busiest cities in the world.
Yeah, don't be fooled. I get crazy. I'm like the road runner. People not in my life don't know where I'd be right now, because I am constantly
It's like a chicken.
constantly on the move. Like, it's a lot of ADHD. It's like, I'm like, I have to do 50 things at once. I can't do just one thing. Like if I'll be cleaning out the kitchen cabinets, well, I'll go to the kitchen cabinet to pull something out, like maybe a bag of rice, and I think, oh my God, this needs a cleanup. So then I'll take everything out of a kitchen cabinet, and then I'll realize that I don't have, say, cereal. So I think I better go to the supermarket and get some cereal. So I'll leave the kitchen counter filled with cans and stuff. And I'll go to the supermarket, I'll get some cereal, I'll come back, and he's like, oh my God, what have you done? Again, why don't you just focus on one thing? And so this is, for me, why my meditation practice is so important, because I get to sit as many times of the day as I need to. It's like, just sit, coach, or just sit. And then there are moments when I just kind of forget about sitting, and I'm like the road runner, right?
Yeah.
So I am not always so calm, tranquil.
Well, that's refreshing to hear, because I know a lot of our listeners can relate to your kitchen. Well, especially myself, the whole kitchen issue, or you go upstairs to do one thing and you get distracted. You end up cleaning up or doing laundry or whatever. So we can all relate, and it's nice to know, okay, we can all get back to that Zen place. And maybe we can kind of talk a little bit about that. Like, is there a difference between a Zen practice and meditation?
You're both shaking your heads.
Yeah.
Well, there is, and Zen practice is very interesting, because it's about your whole life. It's about using, as the founder of our school, his name was Dogen. He was a guy, just who lived
in the 12th, 13th century.
And
Dogen?
Yeah, Dogen, Dogen. And he really what his felt like his most important teaching was that you can use every ingredient of your life to wake up. And so where some schools of meditation are really focused on like, oh, the meditation practice itself is the practice. But in Zen practice, we see every single moment. So when you're brushing your teeth is equal to when you're on a meditation cushion or a chair, that how we're greeting each other right now and how we're sitting with each other is equally important so it's in some ways it's where many people think it's I'm gonna zen out or I'm gonna we get that a lot and but actually it's being exquisitely intimate and alive with all things. So even with as Chodo and I have a thing about our kitty litter situation. So like just cleaning the kitty litter is equal to how we do that, and even how we have disagreements is
so with the kitty litter, I must be much more zen than you then, because I'm the one that ends up cleaning the kitty litter. And we have this deal, you do it in the morning and I'll do it at night. Ends up I do it in the morning and night, which
works out well.
Works out well for him.
but I think the key part of it is, I think that's the big difference between meditation practice and Zen.
I think what you're saying is that in Zen practice, you're present to every moment. Every moment is an opportunity to wake up. So as Koshin said, brushing your teeth, making the breakfast, walking to work, sitting in the cushion. It's like every moment you're aware of what you're doing, as opposed to some forms of meditation. It's kind of, which is no problem at all. It's transcendental, or you're focusing on a candle or something. All great traditions, but that's not Zen. Zen is like right here, right now.
Well, I love that. And I love when you said exquisitely intimate and alive with all things. Mm-hmm. And even in your book, which I want to change gears and talk about, the book Untangled, I remember there was something in there where you're like standing in line at the grocery store. And I love some of those examples because, a lot of times when we're in line at the grocery store, maybe we're looking at our phones or whatever. And that is such a great opportunity to just take a moment and be present with where you are. Maybe you're engaging with the person that's checking you out, or maybe you're just taking deep breaths, or maybe you're appreciating the food you're buying, or whatever it is. So I really loved that example in your book. And I'm wondering if we can talk about Untangled a little bit. When I read about the tangle, it really resonated with me. And you described the tangle as all the ways we bind ourselves up in our fears, our unhelpful stories, and our self-created clouds of confusion. Can you guys talk about that tangle a little bit?
I'd love to hear about that too from your book. I should read it one day.
Cheeky. So Chodo's actually my strongest reader.
And editor.
And well, I remember when I was 17 years old and I went to a retreat, and it was being led by some people who ended up becoming important mentors to me, which I'm a poet named Robert Bly and a Jungian analyst named James Hillman, and this meditation teacher named Jack Cornfield. And I just remember, so there I was at 17, like really hungry for connecting and learning. And he said this kind of a teaching that has stayed with me, which was, the whole world is tangled in a tangle. Who will untangle this tangle? And I remember thinking, wow, that is actually suggesting it's up to each of us to do that. And so to me, it's so humbling to realize that, because I think it's very easy, I came from a background where it would be very easy to just kind of stay in a kind of a victim mentality. And like, I did experience some terrible things, and they were objectively just terrible. And for a long time, I held on to kind of a particular form of identity, like that the world was unsafe and I was a victim. And, and the reality, I think, is that the world is both safe and unsafe. And I was a victim and a million other things. But I think for a time, so the tangle for me was like that binding, that knotting into one way of seeing myself and others. And so the part of like, oh, and then I realized when I heard that, I realized, my goodness, like if I have to stop waiting for someone else to swoop in and save the day, and I have to take responsibility for untangling, like how I'm building a story that is separating me from myself and others. It broke me open. It just I still remember hearing those words, and it's just like, it's almost like it shattered that kind of armor that I had, created all over my body in a really important way. It was painful to, which I think is important, so it's not like, oh, that felt so great. It felt terrible, because it's
right.
And terrible and critical and so important. Yeah. And I felt like it was the beginning of a new life of freshness, possibility, engagement, and responsibility. Because I think in some ways that there's a big difference. I think some of us get stuck in clarity. Like we know our story. We're like, oh yeah, that's my shit, or that's my stuff. And we kind of stop there. We're like, oh, and we just kind of stay in a certain narrative. And I think that, actually when this part of the subtitle of the book is, clarity, courage, and compassion, because I think that it's not enough to stop at our clarity. We have to have the courage to meet that tangle and have the compassion, which is to feel with. So, which is actually part of how I began to feel like I was actually part of the world.
So this is a very profound revelation that you had you said age 17, is that right? To be having this?
Yeah.
Like, what did you learn, like from that moment on? Because what you're saying sounds, I think a lot of people have this armor that you're talking about. A lot of people can relate. But what did you actually do? Like, what learnings did you have through your studies and practices, or, that profound idea that helped you really untangle? From almost even more of a practical standpoint for our listeners.
Therapy. Like I found a really amazing therapist, and because I really needed to work with it, because I realized I was trying to do everything alone because I didn't feel like I could trust anybody. So actually beginning to have a therapeutic relationship with someone where they can actually support and be loving. And I always think it's really important to have a therapist that you feel like is loving, and which is not everyone, of course. And so I found a really amazing person who in many ways kept carving me open, and it felt really violent and at moments, and was really, really, it's maybe kind of similar to what Chodo was sharing about his story, like, it's just learning how to stay with it, even if it feels terrible. And I think that I would say practically that might be the most important thing I learned, is that I learned actually both through practicing Zen as well as therapy together was the beginning of, and continues to be, the most important way of learning how to be still in the midst of fear and being courageous in the midst of discomfort, and for discomfort and awkwardness to not be places of turning away, but of actually, I think what I learned the most and continue to learn is like, those are the places where I'm going to grow the most if I can learn how to bear it. And what I found is that the more I learned how to bear it, what seemed terrifying suddenly didn't have much power. So it's more like the fear itself was more the problem than anything I imagined.
Isn't that funny how that happens?
Yeah.
It's so true though. And people just get, like they can't move because of their fear. And it's like you're so afraid of this thing. And then when you actually do it, it's so much better than what you thought it was going to be. Like we make all this stuff up in our heads that's not true. And I know that, I'm wondering with your center, you probably see people a lot. I'm stumbling over my words. You probably see a lot of people walk in, just feeling lost and lonely and they don't know where to turn. So what advice or what kind of path do you kind of set a person on that walks in and is looking for help?
I think one of the first things that we have to do or say to ourselves is, you just gotta love them. Whatever they're coming from, whatever they're bringing in, it's like, how do you just love this person no matter what they're bringing in? And oftentimes they're bringing in, their own fears, especially post-COVID. That a lot of young guys, a lot of young people had 2 years of isolation and to think about their life. What is my life all about? So many of them have been coming to us because they're really lost. They don't know what actually their life is about. What's my future? What do I have? What's my career look like? Some folks come and they sit, for 2 days and it's like, I'm never coming back. It's not for me. This Zen stuff is not for me. But those who do stick around, we're kind of like mom and dad. We're very caring, very loving teachers, and we actually set a really fine example of how it is to be in partnership and how it is to be in practice. So many of our students just, and it's
Imperfectly perfect.
And it can be, it can be dangerous. Some of our students put it on a kind of pedestal. All of these two Zen monks, they're really, really great and really smart. And actually, one of the first things we tell them is, do not put us on a pedestal because we're going to disappoint you over and over and over again. And when we have a one-on-one student-teacher relationship, for myself, what I will do is when we're in our first meeting, the student says, I'd like you to be my teacher. I say, well, let's first of all write a letter. Tell me why. So I can look at the letter and then say, okay, you need to ask me 3 times. Write another letter, think about it. And then let's sit down together and really look at what this relationship will look like. And I will often say, you know what? I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to make you angry. I'm going to make you sad. And that's what it's all about. Because I want us to have a relationship where we can both be vulnerable. It's real. I'm a great crier. And I'm not going to do this in front of a student, but I can feel it. Feel what's going on. I'm very, my empathic nature is to be, wow, this person needs something different than this person. So this student needs something different to this student. But the grounding that it's laying in is like, this is what we need to do. You need to sit on your butt. Because it's all here. You just have to see it. You just have to find it.
It does sound scary to walk in, a place like a Zen center and just think I'm going to sit, especially for someone that's used to going 100 miles a minute and doing 10,000 things.
The beauty of our center is that because we're a hybrid, we have both the Zen practice and the care practice. So our staff model this warmth. People walk into our center and they're like, we go, hey, what's your name? Meet so-and-so and so-and-so. Would you like some water? Would you like some tea? And we have this different setup. We have like the loungy area and then we have the Zendo area. And they immediately feel comfortable.
Mhm.
To name what brings you here, and then we go from there. So there's no kind of like, oh my God, I'm walking into a Zen center. Well, a little bit maybe.
Yeah.
But we make them feel comfortable immediately, I think. Yeah.
We do the best we can.
And, one thing I'm just kind of wondering too, to people that are walking in, there's a lot of people out there that are just unhappy and lonely. And I think this was really heightened during the pandemic, but we're still seeing it. There's this sense of belonging and love, like you said, and community. Why do you think that is?
Well, as the Surgeon General is talking about loneliness before the pandemic of COVID-19, that there was the World Health Organization announced, the COVID, the pandemic of loneliness globally.
Mhm.
So the breakdown, and we're in a stage, I think, of the capitalist system, which is fine, but we're at a stage where the value has become more about that system than about community relationships.
Mhm.
And so you see the breakdown, and this is even very true in places like China and Japan, and which used to be deeply collective places, right? And where people are dying alone and are just living alone. And there was that new study that just came out this year in 2023 about that 35% of Americans identify as not having a single friend.
Oh my gosh.
That is so high.
35, it was in 2013, it was 17%. So it's doubled.
Wow.
And so I think it's just that we have forgotten, I think, what it means to be a friend. And actually, there's a good chunk of that 35% who are actually married.
Wow.
And so that is a really different form of loneliness, that when you're actually what it's supposed to look like, oh, I'm married and with the kids or family, and yet I don't feel like anyone knows me. And so I think about many things that we offer, which is really about how do you put your values and your actions together. So our foundations and contemplative care training, which is a 9-month training for anyone who's interested in learning how to serve. I feel like that there's a big draw for people who want to do things differently. And the same for our physicians and our contemplative medicine fellowship. They're just this desperate need. And physicians at this time are also in a major crisis where 45% of them are thinking about leaving the profession in the next 3 to 5 years. And that affects everybody.
Yeah.
And so this feeling of loneliness must be addressed. And this is not anything new. Our friend Tarani Lodog, who is the medical director of our fellowship, was seeing this with her primary care patients 20 years ago, where she would ask people in their first appointments, so tell me about who are your 5 people who would drop everything. And this is 20 years ago, and she would have people say, well, she's really busy, already people starting to not feel that people would do whatever they needed to do to show up for folks. So it's powerful, and I feel that we're doing what we can to untangle here at the Zen Center.
I think that's amazing work you're doing. And, I think that our lives in general have just gotten so busy, and everybody's just running, and so wrapped up in their own stuff and they have kids, their own kids or their work or whatever it is. And, that just makes me so sad, that statistic. And when I think about it, like, I feel very lucky that I do have 5 people that I can think of that would drop everything for, and I would do the same. But I also think about, if I did have to drop everything, like, there would be a lot of things I would be dropping the ball on, and would life go on, and would it be okay? And is the most important thing that person in my life? Absolutely. But like, it's a tangle. It's a big tangle.
Right. I mean, we just had this thing this morning where, Chodo wasn't feeling so well. So I was just like, okay, so we're going to clear the day. Turned out to feel fine, but like, I was ready to just like, okay, clear it out, because all of those things that are so important, are they? Right.
Right.
Yeah, there were so many things, like I have a whole host of things lined up for the day. But I think it's so critical to that. How do we really understand what community means? I know there's an elder in a community that I know who was, needing to move into a nursing home, and her one sister wanted her to move there, and in Arizona or somewhere. And she's like, no, I want to stay where my community is. And I remember my grandma was the same, when she got to a certain age, she wanted to stay where her community is. My father wanted, and really well-meaning, but like wanting, now why don't you move up to Syracuse? Or she lived in Brooklyn basically her whole life. And I think that we forget social connection, like those relationships at the grocery store, those relationships at the beauty salon, or wherever that is where you get your mani-pedi. Like, those are actual things that enrich our lives. And it's not to be, and it's one of the reasons that, Chodo and we moved recently to be in this community here in Chelsea, in Manhattan, so that we could actually be closer to the center and like be more embedded in this community. Because it actually, even if you live in a big, busy city, there's folks that we can connect to and love.
And there's probably a lot of people in a big city like New York that are feeling very lonely because everyone is so busy, yeah.
And
So,
I'm even, oh, sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
No, I was just even thinking, like, what are we all looking for? I think you talk about like junk pleasure, but aren't we really looking for something more satisfying? And how can someone who's maybe feeling a little bit like can relate to this conversation? What's something that we can start to do to have a more fulfilling and satisfying life where you feel connected? And we all know that, like, one of the blue zone criteria, the criteria is in the blue zones for living the most, sorry, I'm not speaking very clearly. Those countries where there are the most centenarians, one of the criteria is, do you have people? Do you have, I don't know if there's a questionnaire, if it's 3 or 5 or whatever, but do you have people close to you that are in your circle that you could call and ask anything of?
Yeah.
So how do we move forward? This is like you said, this is a global pandemic issue, actually, right? With relating to loneliness. So what can one person do within, or what can you do within your own community?
Yeah.
I think everyone is looking for love or communication, community. Everybody wants to connect to someone else. And this bringing up the word fear, there's so much fear around in our society now. It's like, can I trust this person? What do they really want out of me? What do they want to get from me? So there's this idea that in some areas that friendship is not safe. Community is not safe. So it's much safer to be on my own, my little apartment, and even have everything delivered. It's a pandemic of loneliness. And how do we see the ways to change that? And I think one of or many of the ways are to join community centers, to come to places like this, to the Zen Center, to go out into the street, just to walk around the street. There's something to be said for walking along the street in the mornings on the way to our center and saying hello to everybody as they come by. Like, good morning, good morning. And the ones that say good morning, you know that they're having I hate to categorize, but generalize, but the ones that say good morning back to you, you know they're having a full life. Or they seem to be. They're like, yeah, hi, good morning, how you doing? What about the flower beds this morning? Then there is those that just walk by or turn away. I think to myself, wow,
What's that feel like?
what does that feel like to just have to turn away? Well, this is an opportunity for us to get to know each other in the mornings. Hey, how are you doing this morning? You know, do you really care? You know, if somebody asks you how you're doing, say, do you really want to know? Yes, I really want to know how you're doing this morning. So it's those kind of moments, again, you know, as I said a few minutes ago, it's like when we make someone the other, we're in trouble. I'm not that person, they're not me, I don't know who they are, they're from a different background, they're a different color, whatever it is. Can I see every person that I interact with, that I walk by, as a moment of connection that could lead to another moment, to another moment, to another moment. And if I never see that person again, it's shown me what's possible for the next person to meet on the street, which I think, as we said earlier, as I said earlier, which is why it's so important when I go into Starbucks in the morning that I know everybody's name, because, you know, in Starbucks, they all have their little name tags, and I know every single one of the baristas' names. There's something really important about that for me. And I know on some level, at deeper level, it's very important for them too, because I see them. See who they are. And when one of them I'll say, John is not in a good mood, I'll say, John, what's going on today? You know, I came here at 5 o'clock this morning to open up, and now I've been told I have to work a double shift, and I had plans for this evening. Wow. Let me talk to you about that. Let me just listen to each other, because I'm here for you. I really want to hear what's going on for you, John. So those kind of communications. So
No, I think that's so important. And I think everybody in the world can do a better job of seeing each other and realizing that we're all human and that we're all the same, right? Like, even though we're different, we're the same. We're all from the earth. We're all. So I think that, you know, if you're listening to this episode, make sure to say hello to your neighbor when you're walking or in the grocery store. You know, ask how the person that's checking you out is doing, and just try and connect. Because I think that's, you know, I think that lack of connection is really, really creating a lot of this loneliness.
Yeah, and I think that
I started, so let me finish.
you already talked.
We're on the same topic. But I think, you know, it's so interesting. And I think we all experience this when you step on an elevator. Nobody's speaking to each other. Suddenly everyone's quiet. Or nowadays, which is really infuriating, they're on their cell phone. They're not with you. They're on their cell phone, still in the elevator. So that their life is so fascinating that I want to hear about it. It's not all so. But how we get on an elevator, it's just so interesting. When you say, hi, how are you doing? Like, what? You know, and there's that fear there, because you're in this small space, in the small elevator, the doors are closed, and suddenly now I'm alone in an elevator with this person. If this person speaks to me, I'm going to like crap myself, because
I don't like being on the elevator with people. I have to be honest, in a small space, like in a tight
Okay,
elevator, because I always think, what if it stops?
Okay.
Like, what if I get stuck in the elevator?
Well, to me,
so
like,
that's different. That's kind of claustrophobic and fear of, you know, getting stuck. But I mean,
It's not about people talking to me.
About
It's
people,
more about
yeah.
just being trapped in the elevator.
I get that.
I would say, just add into this conversation, which I feel like is really super important, is that one of my students, you know, they came to me and said, you know, how's my practice doing? I said, so tell me about 5 people in your neighborhood and their names and what you know about their lives. And he was like, what are you talking about? And I said, he's like, I was asking about, like, he was thinking about meditation. Zen is meditation. No, Zen is life.
Yes.
So how are you living? So I would say also, if you want to change and change the narrative of your life, so how do you get to know 5 people in your neighborhood? And how can you get to know their names, know some things about them, and be curious about them? And it's nothing, fancy. Not like you have to take them out for dinner, but just say like, hi, I realize I don't know your name. This morning, like, there's a new attendant at the gym, Elliot. It's like, how's it going, Elliot? And how is your day? And to actually learn how to connect.
We've lost that art. We've lost the ability to connect, or just the skill, if you will. It's not something that people are comfortable with.
No, because we'll send emojis now, little heart signals. How are you doing? Hands in prayer. We were talking about this last night. It's like we've so gotten used to communicating this way through our cell phones. It's like it's taken the art of conversation out of the picture. It's like,
I do like my emojis, but yes, I totally agree.
But as long as they're not substitute for the conversation.
Right.
End the conversation with your emoji, but it's not. Somebody sends you a text, how you doing? Yeah, I'm like that. And we respond with just a smiley emoji. To me, that's not communicating. That's
totally.
emoji.
And I think this is a great little challenge, the one that you gave your student, Koshin, about getting to know like names of 5 people in your neighborhood and something about them. And I think it's great for our kids, because I see this. I have 3 teenagers, and they use their phones too much, and that's how they connect. But if I ask my daughter questions about some of her friends, she's like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, you didn't ask that question. Like, it's almost like some of these kids have to relearn what it is to be a friend.
And to get to know someone.
Well, so to be a friend is to get to know someone.
But
right?
I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah.
When I'll ask my kids about some of their closest friends, like, oh, what is so-and-so doing this summer? I don't know. What?
Oh, it's not
How
just
do
me.
you not know what your friend is doing this summer? What do you guys talk about for 7 hours when you're together? Like,
right. Are they just on their phones and they don't even know, like, oh, my friend took a vacation. Ask them how it was. I mean, this is just simple, basic stuff, right?
Right.
Be curious.
So, be curious. Yes. Have a curious and open mind.
Yes. Be curious about self. Be curious about the other person. How was it?
Yeah.
What are you going to do? So one of the words that I use a lot is curious. Get curious. And it's not even when they come into the Zen for the first time. I'm afraid, or I'm sad, or I'm angry. Say, okay, what are you curious? What are you afraid of? Can you get curious about the fear? Can you get curious about your anger? Rather than just, oh, I'm angry. Okay, where's that anger coming from? What's the root of it? You may not be able to find it right away, but can you get curious about where it's coming from?
Mm-hmm.
What is this fear? What's behind the fear? There's always a story behind the story.
And a story and a story and a story.
So if we do enough investigation, enough emotional archaeology, we can get to that root of that. Where is this coming from? Yeah.
So what is like one of the most profound things that you guys have learned through, the Zen Center, working with people? I mean, I have to believe you've worked with thousands of people now. Like, is there like something that's just so profound that you can share with our listeners?
Death is inevitable.
Death? Did you say death?
Death is inevitable. That's a very profound teaching.
Yeah.
So many people, it's something out, again, it's something out there. It's not something they ever contemplate. It's not something they ever think about until they get to a certain age and say, oh my God, I've got 10 years left maybe, or I'm going to die. I think, they get ill. It's like, wow, why is this happening to me? Well, because it's happening to you. You are dying, and unfortunately, this is the way you're doing it, through illness or whatever it is. But it's scary, people. So I think the most profound thing that I would say is, you're going to die. And I want you to know that. I want you to understand that you are going to die. And then we can really put the chips on the table and live. Begin to live. You know, yeah.
Well, so I think for me, one of the things that one woman that Chodo and I worked with, when she was living, she said, one thing that, why don't you promise is please never hold back. So one of the things that we learned from working with people is that people's biggest regrets are their hesitation and their living in their fear. Like, we've never met someone near the end of their life who was like, I'm so glad that I was so afraid and I hesitated my whole life. And it's usually the most painful part is realizing, like, what in the world was I so afraid of? And what stopped me from fully participating in my life? And so she asked Chodo and I to promise, and it's actually also in the book, and she said, don't hold back. So when you feel connected, and I think we're also not used to feeling wonderful, and we're not used to feeling connected and nourished. And we often retract from that. I remember actually there's a scene in Ted Lasso where that one character says to the other one, like, well, this is too much for me because it feels too good. And how painful actually that is, and how true that we tend to retract from what's truly nourishing, which for us is a life where we're fully participating and fully loving as much as we can.
Oh, you know what? That was a great way to start to wrap up this conversation, because what you said was really profound. And I truly believe that you're right. We're not used to feeling connected and loved and nourished, and we don't know what it feels like. And then when we do feel that moment, it's scary. There's fear because we're not used to feeling it, which we need to get to the reverse situation.
Exactly.
And so much of the work that you're doing will help people get there. And we want you to share, like, where people can find you, how they can connect with you. And one question I have is, do you work with like teenagers or young adults too? Or is it mainly adults, like in your, just in the overall Zen Center?
Young adults for sure.
What's a young adult? What age would you consider a young adult?
They're coming now in their 1920s.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they can find us, right? And here at zencare.org is our website. And our books, the first one, the latest one, is called Untangled, Walking the Eightfold Path to Clarity, Courage, and Compassion. And that's available on audio and digital and hardback, anywhere books are sold, as well as the other book, which is called Wholehearted, Slow Down, Help Out, Wake Up. And the first book that we put together was called Awake at the Bedside, Contemplative Teachings on Palliative and End-of-Life Care. And those are all available wherever books are sold. You can find us on Instagram at New York Zen Center and Chodo Robert Campbell, and as well as Koshin Paley Ellison on Instagram. And we also have a podcast of teachings, and so it's not conversation, but there are teachings, and that is the Zen Care podcast. So lots of ways to connect, and please do.
And we'll link all that up in the show notes for the listeners.
Great.
So one thing we like to ask all of our guests as we wrap up the conversation is, what does the art of living well mean to you?
Connection, communication, noticing, listening, looking, watching, being fully present for Koshin and myself, and being fully present to each other in each moment. And not that we're 100% successful, but to really begin to try to live that, to honor our relationship, to each other and to everyone else that we come across, that we come into contact with. Honor our relationship, all our relationships, honor and respect. And of course, there are relationships that are fractious, and sometimes we just want to pull away.
Honor that too.
and honor that pulling away. Okay, this is the culmination. This is the end of this friendship, as it is in this
For now.
for now.
Mhm.
People, there are some people in my life I haven't spoken to in 5 years, but if I bump into them out on the street again, the first thing I want to do is give them a hug and say, how are we doing? How are we doing? And I've done that so many times. And all it takes is for one person to reach out and say, again, get curious. What's been happening?
Mm.
Or how did that happen to us? What created?
Yeah.
So often we're so unaware. Oh, blaming.
Mhm.
Right.
Mm.
Instead of untangling, right?
Untangling.
Yeah. I love that word. It's my new word.
Well, that's
Love it.
That's an untangled life, right? Where we're
Yeah.
Yeah,
with what is. Right?
Yep. Yep. That's beautiful.
I love that. The art of living well is living an untangled life.
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, you guys are a beautiful couple. And for those that are watching the video, you can see like the connection that you have that then you put forth for the world. So thank you for sharing all that with us today.
Thank you so
Such
much.
a
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. We wish you a wonderful day.
Yes, you too.
May
Bye-bye.
your life go well. Not just today. May your life go.
Thank you.
Thank you.